Maya Johnson stepped into the oak-paneled courtroom just as morning light filtered through the tall, arched windows, casting elongated shadows across the polished floor. Her heels clicked against the marble threshold, echoing softly beneath the vaulted ceiling. She carried a slim leather briefcase in one hand and clutched the straps of her tailored suit with the other, a charcoal gray ensemble that lent her the authority she had earned over years of relentless study and advocacy. Yet despite her confidence, her heart pulsed with anticipation. Today was the day she would argue a landmark discrimination case, one that could reshape employment law in the region. She paused at the threshold of the bar, smoothing the crisp collar of her white blouse. Around her, court staff moved with quiet efficiency. A clerk arranged file folders on a long table, a bailiff straightened his duty belt, and a stenographer tapped rhythmically at her machine, filling the hush with a soft, mechanical staccato. Beyond the bench, the gallery's wooden pews were already half filled. Family members of the plaintiff, legal observers, and a smattering of reporters, their cameras trained like silent sentinels on the elevated dais. At exactly 9 o'clock, the tall double doors at the back swung open, and Judge Walter Ormond entered. His black robes brushed the floor as he mounted the bench, pausing to survey the courtroom with cool, appraising eyes. He adjusted his bits of silver chain and cleared his throat, jarring the tense calm into full awareness. "Good morning, counsel," he intoned, voice resonant in the hush. Maya rose to her feet, offering a respectful nod. "Your Honor," she replied, steady and precise. He glanced down at a stack of papers before him. "Ms. Johnson, before we begin, I must address an issue of courtroom decorum." His gaze flicked to the back of her head, where neatly braided hair was coiled into a low bun. She felt the weight of his stare and realized, with a tightening in her chest, what was coming. "I note that your hair is styled in cornrows. While I respect personal style, this court maintains a standard of appearance that I expect all counsel to adhere to. Please remove your braids or cover them with a plain hairpiece." His words landed like stones in the still air. Maya's pulse quickened, not from shock, but from the familiar flash of indignation she had learned to recognize over the years. She glanced around. Jurors shifted uneasily in their seats. Witnesses exchanged furtive glances, and the stenographer's fingers paused mid-tape. A hush swept through the gallery. For a moment, nothing moved but the judge's pendulous silver gavel chains. She remained standing. "Your Honor," she began, her voice unwavering though her throat felt tight. "With respect, my hairstyle conforms to professional standards. It assists me in presenting my case without distraction. I decline to remove or conceal it." The judge's mouth tightened into a thin line. He leaned forward, palms splayed on the bench. "Ms. Johnson, courtroom standards are clear. I will insist you comply or step aside until you do." A faint murmur rippled through the room. Maya's fingers tightened on the handle of her briefcase. She understood that to comply was to betray her identity. To refuse risked being held in contempt. Yet she also knew that every fiber of her being, the long nights poring over case law, the victories that had been hard won before juries and judges, had led her to stand precisely in this moment. She inhaled, letting the soft crunch of chalk-like dust from the carved wood under her boots ground her. "Your Honor, I am prepared to proceed as is," she said calmly. "If that is unacceptable, then I respectfully ask that the court proceed without me." Silence pressed in. The judge rose and tapped his gavel once. An abrupt, sharp report. "Ms. Johnson, this court will adjourn briefly while you consider your options." The gavel struck again, and the bailiff stepped forward, gesturing toward the door. Maya closed her eyes for a heartbeat, envisioning the years of struggle behind her, the mentoring from her aunt who practiced law in the same city under even harsher prejudice, the countless internships where she had been the only person of color in the room, the whispered doubts cast upon her by colleagues who believed her hair was unprofessional. All those voices now merged into a single resolve. She would not be shamed into erasing her heritage to fit another's comfort. She opened her eyes and squared her shoulders. "Your Honor, I stand by my attire and hairstyle. I will await the court's decision." With that, she sat, placing her briefcase on the table and opening it slowly, as though each motion affirmed her right to be here. The bailiff snapped his handcuffs shut and escorted her into the antechamber, the doors closing behind her with heavy finality. In the antechamber's narrow corridor, Maya exhaled and leaned against the wall, her reflection flickering in the small window of the closed courtroom door. Outside, a muted commotion rose as lawyers and onlookers paused to discuss the extraordinary moment. She straightened her jacket, smoothed her hands across her braids, and allowed herself a quiet, steadying breath. The fight was only beginning, and she would meet it head-on. Behind the closed doors of Judge Orman's chamber, history teetered on the edge of a gavel strike. And for Maya Johnson, the simple act of wearing her hair would become the opening salvo in a battle for respect, dignity, and true justice. The heavy oak doors swung closed behind Maya Johnson with a muted thud that echoed down the marble-paneled corridor. The sudden retreat of borrowed authority, the judge's gavel still resonating in her ears, left her feeling both exposed and electrified. Outside the courtroom, sunlight slanted through high windows onto polished floors, illuminating motes of dust that danced like restless spirits. Maya pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breath as she navigated a tide of hushed conversations and sidelong glances. In the antechamber, two associates in dark suits froze mid-step as she approached. One, a young man with a Prada tie and nervous eyes, stammered, "Ms. Johnson, are you—" He trailed off, uncertain whether to offer sympathy or reproach. His partner, a bespectacled woman riffling through a stack of case files, simply shook her head and murmured, "I can't believe he did that." Maya offered a brief, composed nod, but said nothing. Every legal eye in the hallway was trained on her, some with admiration, others with thinly veiled contempt. Across the corridor, a group of reporters huddled before the press room door, cell phones at the ready. Through the glass panel, she caught sight of live feed banners. Lawyer refused over hair, contempt, or courage, and courtroom-style standards under fire. Flashbulbs popped, and the corridor momentarily glowed with reflected glare. Maya squared her shoulders and met a camera lens head-on, her face a mask of calm resolve. Then she slipped into the nearest conference room, closing the door softly behind her. Inside, Marcus Turner, the plaintiff in the discrimination suit, rose from a folding chair to greet her. A high school math teacher by trade, Marcus's voice trembled with concern. "Ms. Johnson, I'm so sorry you have to go through this. Should I ask my family to come?" He glanced nervously toward the door as if expecting the bailiff to barge in at any moment. Maya gave him a reassuring smile. "No need to worry about that. The judge's outburst only bolsters our case," she said. "And it shows the very bias we're fighting against. An institutional barrier masquerading as decorum." Marcus exhaled, pressing his palms against his knees, and studied her with gratitude. With the door securely latched, Maya retrieved her tablet and began reviewing precedent. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission v. Abernathy, 2018, where an administrative law judge was censured for enforcing grooming policies that disproportionately affected Black employees. She tapped through annotations on Smith v. Hairstyle Coalition, 2021, in which a federal appeals court recognized protective hairstyles as a form of race-related expression under Title VII. As she cited each case aloud, Marcus nodded, his tension easing. "We'll argue that your refusal to remove your braids constitutes an adverse employment action. Except here, it's an adverse courtroom action," she quipped, and he managed a shaky laugh. Meanwhile, beyond the conference room walls, corridors thrummed with whispered conjecture. Paralegals scuttled past, clutching legal pads stamped with the courtroom seal. Security officers conferred in low tones by the elevators. Inside Judge Orman's chambers, muffled voices carried, a senior jurist debating procedure with two clerks, pages of rules strewn across a mahogany desk. Maya imagined the judge pacing behind his desk, weighing the optics of ordering her to cover her hair against the risk of being seen as enforcing racial hierarchy. After 10 minutes, a discreet knock sounded at the door. The bailiff's clipped voice announced, "Counsel may return to the courtroom." Maya tapped her pen against her notebook twice to collect her thoughts, then stood and offered Marcus a steadying hand on the shoulder. "Remember, when we re-enter, Project Confidence. We're not the ones on trial." He straightened his tie and exhaled once more, then followed her into the hallway. Their footsteps fell in unison as they approached the judge's chamber, the hush before the storm pressing in on either side. On the steps leading back to the bench, Maya paused, brushing a stray curl away from her braided crown. A fellow attorney from the opposing bar caught her eye and inclined his head with thin politeness. He mouthed, "Good luck," but the look in his eyes hinted at something more. Respect, tinged with envy. She gave him a curt nod. In that fraction of a moment, she felt the full weight of her choice, to stand by her identity despite the risk of censure. As the doors swung open and Maya re-entered the courtroom, whispers faded into respectful silence. All eyes turned to her, and she took her place at the counsel table with calm assurance. Behind her, Marcus settled into his seat, drawing courage from her presence. The judge, already seated, tapped his gavel once, more softly this time, and beckoned them to proceed. In the hush that followed, Maya prepared to transform the echoes of corridor gossip into a powerful argument that what had begun as a dispute over hairstyle was, at its core, a fight for equal dignity under the law. And as she opened her mouth to speak, the hush shifted to rapt attention, the very spotlight she had sought. When the heavy oak doors swung open again, Maya Johnson stepped into the courtroom with measured poise. The judge's gavel still hung silently on the bench, as if even it hesitated to break the tense atmosphere. Maya walked to her table, each footstep resonating on the polished marble floor. She set her leather briefcase down, allowed her gaze to sweep the room, jurors, spectators, opposing counsel, and then turned her attention fully to the bench. Judge Ormond folded his hands, eyes narrowing slightly. "Ms. Johnson," he began, voice low but carrying, "you have elected to proceed without conforming to the court's appearance standards. Do you wish to make any further statement before we resume?" Maya closed her briefcase with a soft click and rose, her back perfectly straight. The hush that followed was so complete, she could almost hear her own heartbeat. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "I stand by my decision not to remove or conceal my braids. My hairstyle is an expression of my cultural identity and does not impede my ability to perform my duties as counsel. In fact, it is no different from any other professional choice, such as a tailored suit or a conservative haircut, that you in this court routinely accept." A murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge's lips pressed into a thin line. He tapped his gavel twice. "Very well, we will proceed. Counsel for the plaintiff, you may begin your opening statement." Maya drew in a steadying breath and approached the center of the courtroom floor. Placing her hands lightly on the edge of a wooden lectern, the light from the tall windows cast her silhouette onto the polished floor, giving her an almost monumental presence. She allowed her gaze to meet each juror's eyes in turn, ensuring they knew exactly who was speaking on their behalf. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice clear, "today we stand before you not merely to seek justice for my client, Mr. Marcus Turner, but to affirm a foundational principle of our democracy, that no citizen may be judged, dismissed, or compelled to alter the essence of who they are in order to access fundamental rights." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "When a court of law demands that I conform my appearance to arbitrary standards, it is not simply an act of preference. It is an act of exclusion." She moved seamlessly into the heart of her argument, outlining relevant precedents with precise citations. In Smith v. Hairstyle Coalition, the appellate court recognized that protective hairstyles are inseparable from racial identity and fall under Title VII's protection against discrimination. When Judge Ormond asked me to cover or remove my braids, he replicated the same discriminatory impulse that barred Mr. Turner from opportunities in his workplace, an impulse that the law has repeatedly condemned. Opposing counsel rose to object, voice clipped, "Objection, Your Honor," argumentative and prejudicial. But the judge waved him down. Overruled. "Ms. Johnson may continue." Maya nodded, unfazed, and continued. She wove together testimony from workplace experts, statistical data showing disparate impact of grooming policies, and Mr. Turner's own experience of being passed over for promotion because of his hair. All the while, her braids framed her face like a crown, visible, unapologetic, unbowed. As she delivered her final point, Maya's voice softened but did not waver. "This case is not about hairstyle. It is about dignity. It is about a man who was denied an opportunity because of ingrained bias, and about the very court that now sits in judgment of my appearance. We ask you, honorable jurors, to hold both the employer and this institution accountable to the principle that no policy, no custom, no judge may strip a person of their identity." Silence reigned in the courtroom as Maya returned to her seat. Even opposing counsel was still, brow furrowed in concentration. Judge Ormond peered over his glasses, the gavel unmoved at his side. In that moment, Maya Johnson's defiant stand had reframed the entire trial. Not merely a dispute over Mr. Turner's rights at work, but a larger question of who gets to define professionalism and whose dignity the law protects. And as the court prepared for the employer's counsel to reply, every person in that chamber understood that this trial had become a landmark, not just in theory, but in the very practice of justice. The crisp autumn wind whipped through the plaza as Maya Johnson stepped out of the federal courthouse doors, sunlight glinting off the polished marble steps behind her. She paused to survey the scene. Clustered reporters, their microphones thrust forward like curious vines, news vans with satellite dishes pivoting skyward, advocates and activists craning their necks for a glimpse of her calm, composed figure. In just a few hours, she and co-counsel would stand before the highest court in the land, fighting to transform a local bias complaint into a constitutional affirmation that protective hairstyles are protected expression under the First and 14th Amendments. Inside the grand chamber of the Supreme Court, the air was hushed, reverent. The justices, robed in austere black, sat in solemn silence behind a long bench that stretched from wall to wall. The emblem of E pluribus unum was carved into the dark wood above them, a quiet reminder of unity and diversity. Maya and the Solicitor General's team rose together as the clerk called the case name: Turner v. Harris County, Johnson v. Harris County. Two separate titles, but a single, unifying question. Could a state actor, here, a judge enforcing courtroom decorum, violate the constitutional rights of an attorney on the basis of her race-linked hairstyle? When the Solicitor General began her oral argument, she framed the question in constitutional terms. Your Honors, this court has long recognized that protected expression encompasses more than words. It includes symbols, gestures, attire, and indeed, hairstyles that convey cultural identity. A sea of notebooks scribbled the point. Then Maya was invited to address the court directly. She rose, heart steady, and approached the lectern. May it please the court, she began, voice resonant in the vaulted space. At issue is whether an assumption about what constitutes professionalism can justify state suppression of cultural expression. She went on to trace the judge's request for her to cover or remove her braids, demonstrating how that demand operated as both viewpoint discrimination and as an arbitrary barrier that echoes centuries of enforced assimilation. Behind her, the justices, some with pens poised, others steepling their hands, listened intently. Justice Martinez, the first to speak, leaned forward. Ms. Johnson, he said, can you clarify how this differs from a uniform grooming standard applied neutrally to all attorneys, regardless of background? Maya nodded, anticipating the question. Your Honor, a neutral policy that requires, say, a clean-shaven face for all attorneys still allows every individual to comply uniformly. A ban on braids, however, targets a practice disproportionately associated with one racial group, thus producing a disparate impact that the court has already found unconstitutional under Title VII precedent. Justice Martinez exchanged a glance with Justice O'Connor. Then O'Connor posed a sharper challenge. But is this purely a race question, or is it more broadly about state authority over court practices? How do we draw the line between permissible courtroom decorum and impermissible discrimination? Maya took a measured breath. Decorum must serve the fair administration of justice, not undermine it. When a stylistic choice has no bearing on courtroom function or safety, it falls outside the state's legitimate interests. To demand its removal is to weaponize decorum as a tool of exclusion. The argument stretched on. Questions about stare decisis, concerns over floodgates, hypotheticals about multicolored dreadlocks, beaded braids, even turbans and hijabs. Maya answered each in turn, weaving constitutional citations with lived experience. How her ability to advocate for clients was compromised whenever she was forced to dissimulate her heritage. At one point, Justice Patel leaned forward, gaze intense. Ms. Johnson, what remedy are you seeking? Monetary damages, declaratory relief, something more? We seek declaratory judgment that the enforcement of hairstyle prohibitions by a court official violates the equal protection and free exercise clauses, and an injunction against any future such enforcement, Maya replied. Our goal is not to punish, but to protect, ensuring that courtroom doors remain open equally to all who seek justice, unburdened by demands to erase their cultural identity. After the final question, the Solicitor General offered her brief rebuttal, and the bench fell silent. Maya returned to her seat, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Outside, the press thrummed with projections. Oral arguments reveal high court split. Will culturally significant hairstyles finally gain constitutional shield? But inside the chamber, no one spoke. The presence of history was palpable. Weeks later, on a brisk December morning, Maya sat with co-counsel in a packed briefing room as a clerk read the court's decision. The words spilled out, a 6-3 ruling in favor of the petitioners, affirming that county judges and other state actors may not enforce grooming or appearance rules that disproportionately burden a protected class. That such enforcement, absent a compelling, narrowly tailored interest, is unconstitutional. The crowd erupted in triumphant cheers. Maya closed her eyes, letting the gravity of the moment settle in her chest. A landmark victory not only for her client, Marcus Turner, but for every American whose identity found expression through their hair. As she stepped back into the sunlight, reporters clamored, shouts echoing off the courthouse facade. She paused on the steps, turned to face the throng, and raised her hand for quiet. "Today," she said, voice steady though tears shimmered at her eyes, "we affirm that justice is indivisible from dignity. No courtroom, no state actor may demand that you erase who you are to be heard." The applause swelled and cameras flashed. In that moment, Maya Johnson's defiant stand had become constitutional law and a beacon for future generations. When the Supreme Court's opinion was issued, its words reverberated far beyond Washington. Within days of the 6-3 decision, court clerks in jurisdictions across the country circulated memoranda instructing judges to review and repeal any courtroom rules governing professional appearance that might single out hairstyles associated with race, religion, or culture. Maya Johnson watched these developments unfold from her office window. As spring blossoms unfurled on the cherry trees outside, it felt as though her own story, once confined to a single courtroom dispute, had become a catalyst for national reform. Across town in Harris County, Judge Ormond convened a special session of the bench. The County Bar Association hall buzzed with tension as judges, clerks, and administrative staff filed in. At the head of the long table, Ormond cleared his throat. "In light of the Supreme Court's recent ruling," he announced, "we will immediately rescind all archaic appearance rules that lack demonstrable necessity. Effective today, no attorney may be asked to alter any aspect of their hair or attire unless it directly and materially interferes with courtroom safety or functionality." A murmur of relief swept the room. Then applause. It was an uneasy but meaningful reconciliation. The very judge who had once demanded conformity was now instructing his peers to embrace diversity. Meanwhile, at Marcus Turner's law firm, the news sparked jubilation. Maya joined Marcus and his colleagues for a celebratory lunch in the firm's modest break room. Plates of sandwiches and chips contrasted with the weighty atmosphere of legal victory. Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes shining. "I never imagined my case would lead to a change at the highest court," he said, voice wavering with gratitude. "But you made it happen." Maya smiled, stirring her iced tea. "We all did. You had the courage to stand up. I just helped you tell the story." Word of the landmark decision spread quickly into law schools, where professors updated curricula to include the Turner-Johnson precedent. In classrooms from Boston to Los Angeles, students debated the decision's implications. How far does courtroom authority extend? What other everyday biases might lack sufficient justification? And wrote papers on its potential to shape employment law, educational policy, and public accommodations. Maya accepted invitations to speak at several symposiums, describing the case's origins in a routine discrimination claim and its culmination in a constitutional guardrail for individual dignity. Back in her own practice, Maya found her caseload transformed. Clients whose rights had been questioned on the basis of appearance, be they teachers disciplined for wearing turbans, employees reprimanded for natural hair, or students penalized for traditional dress, now had a powerful precedent to invoke. She drafted motions citing Turner versus Harris County by name, watching as judges hesitated before enforcing any policy that might carry the taint of exclusion. With each successful challenge, the decision's protective reach widened. Yet, even amid professional triumph, Maya never forgot the personal stakes that had galvanized her stand. On the first anniversary of the Supreme Court's ruling, she returned to the very courtroom where her ordeal began. The oak doors gleamed under fresh polish as she walked through the same threshold, now flanked by portraits of past judges who had served on that bench. She ran a hand gently over the carved panel, an act of reclamation, not confrontation. Inside, the courtroom felt different. Brighter, less formal, imbued with a spirit of openness. Attorneys of every background stood confidently at counsel tables, their appearances as varied as the cases they argued. After the calendar call, Maya paused at the bench and addressed the new judge seated there, a woman in her early 40s who met Maya's gaze with a nod of respect. "Thank you for upholding the court's guidance," Maya said softly. The judge smiled. "Your case changed how we see decorum. In my chambers, we value substance over style." They shook hands, sealing a quiet covenant to preserve both the dignity of the court and the dignity of every person who came through its doors. That evening, Maya returned home to her apartment, light spilling through wide windows onto shelves lined with legal tomes and photographs of her family. She brewed a pot of tea, settled into her armchair, and reflected on the journey. From that tense first moment in which her identity was questioned, to the moment she stood before 12 justices whose ruling would echo in every courtroom across America. She opened her journal and wrote a final entry under the heading, Legacy. The law is not static. It lives in the choices we make when principles collide with prejudice. Today, the court stands as a guardian of both fairness and identity. Tomorrow, another injustice will arise, and we must be ready. As the city lights glittered below, Maya closed her journal with quiet satisfaction. A precedent had been forged, one that would guide judges, protect advocates, and affirm that true justice demands respect for every individual's humanity. And though her own role in the story had come to a close, the decision she'd helped secure would live on, shaping the law's capacity to uplift rather than exclude, one courageous stand at a time.